The Fall of the House of Usher, a masterpiece of psychological crime. Welcome, my friends. Today we shall take one of the most celebrated classics of Gothic horror and turn it upside down, transforming it from supernatural horror into a perfect psychological crime. In truth, the theory we discuss today that the narrator is the actual murderer who disposed of the ushers and burned their evidence is no mere passing whim. Rather, it is a forensic reading recognized in certain modern deconstructive analyses of Edgar Allan Poe's works, specifically by linking it to his technique in his other famous tales, such as The Telltale Heart and The Black Cat, where the protagonists therein are psychopathic killers, justifying their monstrous deeds with hallucinations and cursed houses. If we superimpose this forensic theory upon the textual details of the Fall of the House of Usher, we shall find astonishing evidence that fully supports it. 1. The hidden motive. The narrator informs us at the beginning that he arrived at the mansion because his friend Roderick sent him a letter entreating his aid because he was ill. But the most crucial question here is, where is this letter? We as readers have never beheld it. What if the narrator had come to settle an ancient score, or out of greed for the fortune of this decaying feudal family, or even as a form of absolute sadism toward his childhood companion? 2. Burying Madeline alive, the perfect crime. Recall how the sister, Madeline, perished in the midst of the tale. Roderick and the narrator were the ones who placed her within the coffin and entombed her within the subterranean vault. The narrator himself describes her countenance, noting that her cheeks still bore a faint blush, a clear sign that she was yet living, not dead. The forensic scenario here elucidates that the narrator perceived she was in a coma, and instead of saving her, he convinced the mentally deranged Roderick of the necessity of burying her swiftly beneath the mansion, so as to rid himself of the sister first, and isolate the brother. 3. Psychological manipulation, gaslighting. Throughout the days following the entombment, Roderick grew increasingly terrified, swearing that he heard the sounds of her movement and her shrieks from below. What was the narrator doing in return? He calmed him, read tales to him, and persuaded him that these were merely the sounds of the wind or the echoes of the mansion. This technique is a classic psychological manipulation, practiced by the killer to drive his victim toward the brink of madness and utter collapse, thereby fashioning for himself a perfect alibi. 4. The night of the crime and Roderick's death. On the final night, the doors burst open, and Madeline appears, shrouded in blood, casting herself upon Roderick, whereupon they both perish together. According to our theory, this surreal, terrifying scene is merely the allegorical cover that the narrator fabricated in his writing to conceal what he truly committed. The real scenario on that dark night might be that Madeline did indeed escape, or that the narrator was the one who drew her out, exploiting the state of terror and darkness to strangle or murder them both in cold blood. 5. The escape of the narrator and the splitting of the mansion, the arson. The narrator claims at the end that he fled and beheld the mansion splitting in twain and sinking into the tarn. Yet in forensic lore, when a professional criminal desires to obliterate the traces of a gruesome murder and two corpses bearing marks of violence, what is the easiest and swiftest solution? Setting the entire place ablaze. The narrator torched the mansion to bury his evidence, and the tarn that swallowed everything is but a metaphorical representation of the mansion's ashes that vanished. The constabulary of that era would find nothing save the burnt ruins of a madman and his sister who perished in a tragic accident, whilst the faithful friend miraculously escaped to write us this tale and establish his innocence before all. The ultimate conclusion. Should this theory hold true, the narrator in The Fall of the House of Usher is one of the most perilous and cunning serial killers in literary history, for he did not merely slaughter his victims, but he made millions of readers across 2 centuries believe that he was a kindly soul endeavoring to help, whilst he was recounting the tale of his crime with a wealth of psychopathic exaggeration and poetry. Now, my friends, we arrive at the most shocking portion of this literary forensic investigation, wherein we shall grasp together the definitive proof, what is commonly known as the smoking gun. We shall transition from merely reading an ordinary tale of horror to adopting the mantle of the detective, dismantling the text linguistically to ensnare the murderer by his own tongue. This linguistic observation, which we shall now discuss, is of the utmost depth and subversion. For the phrasing of "she is no more," or "it is no more," uttered by Edgar Allan Poe through the lips of the narrator, is no mere passing expression. Nay, it is a terrifying slip of the tongue, a Freudian slip that utterly exposes the killer and unveils psychological and historical significances that fully support our forensic theory. Let us reveal how this simple sentence laid bare this heinous crime. 1. The celebrated tone and relief. When a beloved soul or a friend perishes within a tragic, sorrowful context, words expressing grief and regret, such as passed away or deceased, are customary. As for the phrasing "is no more," within historical and ancient literary contexts, it was uttered when a heavy burden vanished or a threat that tormented everyone was brought to an end. The narrator here does not weep for Madeline. Rather, he proclaims in a tone resembling a conqueror, "She is ended. She exists no longer." These are not the words of a man grief-stricken by the death of his friend's sister, but the words of one who has successfully executed a step in his grand design and exhaled a sigh of relief. 2. The dehumanization of the victim. If we scrutinize certain editions and analyses of the novella, we shall find a distinct focus on the use of a phrasing that renders Madeline an object that is ended, rather than a human being. The psychopathic killer, in order to shield himself from the pangs of guilt and to justify his crime before his own conscience, dehumanizes the victim within his mind. Thus, Madeline to him was not a young woman dying of pestilence, but an obstacle or an entity that must be erased from existence. The moment she was committed to the tomb, he whispered within himself, "She is no more." 3. Proclaiming the fall of the kingdom. The novella ever links, in symbolic fashion, the lineage of the House of Usher and their race with the mansion itself. Based upon this, the death of Madeline is the actual proclamation of the utter fall of this entire dynasty, for she is the sister by whose demise the lineage is completely severed. The narrator, by employing this regal and historic phrasing, "It is no more," treats the matter as though he is witnessing, or fashioning with his own hands, the fall of an empire or a tyrant, which reinforces the motive of hidden vengeance or sadistic purging by which he has been driven from the very dawn of his arrival. The forensic threads are fully interwoven. If we gather the threads of this case now, we shall find that the scenario unfolds precisely as follows. First, the suspicious entry. A narrator enters the mansion with exaggerated language and a suspicious vagueness to conceal his hidden motive. Second, the obsession with vulnerabilities. A morbid fixation on the windows as though he is studying the ingress and egress of the structure. Third, the burial alive, convincing the brother to entomb the sister whilst she yet bears the flush of life upon her countenance, so as to be rid of her. Fourth, the linguistic slip, proclaiming her death in a celebrated phrasing devoid of any human empathy, "It's no more." Fifth, the ultimate cover-up, murdering the brother, then torching the entire estate and fabricating a surreal tale of the earth splitting and the Tarn swallowing the mansion to conceal the vestiges of blood and ash. Edgar Allan Poe was utterly obsessed with the psychology of crime, and he is, in essence, the inventor of detective fiction through his celebrated character, C. Auguste Dupin. It is truly marvelous how, by employing these self-same tools of literary detection, we can transform one of the most famous tales of metaphysics and horror in history into a fully fledged psychological murder mystery, based upon a single word uttered by the killer without his ever realizing it.